Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about healing interactions with horses. And um, when I call that healing interactions, to me, there has to be positive in it for both horses and humans. And coming from a more traditional education in the horse worlds, oftentimes we don't we haven't really been educated on thinking about the horse's perspective. We don't necessarily give them a choice, which I think for their healing, we have to offer them a choice and we have to listen to what they're going to say. And of course, the more positives that we can bring in for the humans, the better the interactions will be. And so I'll tell a little bit of my story because I think my journey explains a lot about how these elements became important and from what I've seen, how they can really make a big difference. And at one time I had a private counseling practice that was it was mostly more traditional sit and talk, except I had a dog that came with me. So there was always a little element of being an outlier in there, but it was definitely not an equine facilitated practice. And I also had fallen back into teaching riding lessons again, something that I hadn't really done since high school. And so I was kind of having these two areas of my life, businesses in each of them. And what happened was I thought that I entered into the riding lessons to kind of just teach the leftovers from the instructor that handed them off to me until they got tired and went to somebody else and concentrate on growing my counseling practice. And I started to notice that the people that came to me to learn how to ride a horse, disclosing things much deeper, much quicker, and making changes in the rest of their lives much deeper and much quicker than the people that actually sought me out for counseling. And so I was very intrigued by this and started to investigate and found out that equine self-growth work was actually a thing. And they had programs at that time mostly that were just out west, and they were really expensive, and the travel factor also. And so I didn't get educated yet in any of those programs. And I started to think about other fits because I was also involved in coach education, life coaching, and started to recognize how many of the students that were coming to me, the riding students, were adults rather than kids, because I had inherited mostly kids. And these adults usually were facing some kind of confidence issue. They either were dealing with anxiety in most everywhere of their lives, or they had a fear issue being around the horses. And I had never realized how great that was. And so I kind of started out coaching the riders with confidence issues, which I had always been interested in biomechanics. And I started to look at how a horse moved when it was moving, how I like to term correctly, back to front. It was tracking up. It was using its hind end. There can be like a ripple that goes all the way up its spine when the horse is not blocked somewhere, not resistant, not in pain. And I would notice that having a rider up on the horse, and often I would lunge the horse so that the rider didn't have to be in control of it, so to speak. And whenever we would talk about things that would be a sticky issue for the rider, and most of the time that it was, thinking about if their horse was going to spook or their level of talent or ability, I would notice that the striding on the horse would change. And as we would help them talk through whatever that issue was, the horse would start striding as it was before. And what I found absolutely fascinating and wonderful was sometimes when they would get to a better place themselves mentally and emotionally, of course, it had affected them physically, but then their horse, without any type of manipulation or attempt of influence on purpose from the rider, the horse would start to move better because they lined things up internally. And so that was the stuff that I found fascinating. And over the years, I was still playing in both worlds, and eventually I dropped my office counseling practice and moved to the barn. And after I did that, I ended up, I actually shopped for. I bought a horse, which I don't hardly do anymore, because in my dressage life, I never got to ride the horses that had the physical talent to do those big, cool, wonderful things. I had always ridden the horses that might have a lameness issue, a mental imbalance issue, and when I was working for a trainer, I would get those horses, I would get them to a certain point, she would take them over, and then I would start over again. And so I picked out this horse. He was a 2-year-old, and I was like, okay, now the training really begins. And, you know, I get to do all this fun stuff. And two things pretty important happened. One was I also found out that I was pregnant. I was going to be a mom. And the second was I recognized that my horse was going to say no to me a lot. And fortunately, I recognized that before he said anything big enough and loud enough that either of us got hurt. But recognizing now that being a mom, I was important to somebody. If I got hurt, you know, who was going to take care of my baby at that time? And I'm very glad that happened. You know, of course, it was a little backwards because now my point of view and my interest would have been more towards, well, if he's saying no, why is he saying no? But at that time, you know, still thinking in that framework of don't let the horse know you're the boss. Because you ask it something, it should just comply. There wasn't any of that wiggle room that I think we offer horses now to be able to say yes to our invitations. You know, can you do this? Yes, I'm ready and I will. And so over the years, I started to train him more, but it was still a very slow process. And one of the things that I was always curious about ever since I got him, if I would stand back by his shoulder, like right where his neck hooks onto his body, anywhere back, he would swish his tail. And I had never seen a horse that did that before. And so I was asking anybody that I could find, trying to do whatever research I could to figure out why he was doing that. And I had answers, everything from, well, I think he's uncomfortable. I think he's in physical pain. Somebody told me that, oh, well, maybe he did that when he was nursing, and so it's a positive thing, which that would have been great and wonderful, but no, that wasn't it. And I also had a wide range of remedies. You know, people were giving me advice on how to fix this. Anything from, well, when he does that, you know, get after him until it stops, or just keep, you know, of course, if I went to put a saddle on him or anything, the tail would swish more. And so I was just supposed to keep doing that or standing there until his tail would not swish so much. And well, he had a lot more stamina than I did, and it just didn't feel right either. And I was starting to get much better at honoring what I was feeling about this horse instead of just listening to what I was told to do, because not necessarily something that's a great trait or that I'm proud of, but I really thought I just had to do what everybody else was telling me for my horses because they knew better. They were winning the ribbons. They were teaching the students, training the horses. And one of the things that finally gave a framework for some of the things that I was just kind of doing with him already was when we had somebody from the Masterson method come out and did a training at the farm. And one of the things that they say that I love so much is, you know, to pay attention to what your horse is telling you. And their big premise is that when a horse is in a relaxed state and you apply a light pressure with how their nervous system is wired, they will release tensions that they have in their body. And, you know, a lot of times when we have a horse, we don't know what the horse's history was. Or even more importantly, we don't know how things that happened to them in the past have affected them. Because some horses, for example, are just fine living in a stall. Other horses are not. And that can already put a little bit of tension or lead to something I like to call shutdown. I know some people will argue that term, but you know, whatever causes a horse to shut down or to enter a little bit into the endure, you know, just let me get this over with and then I'll be out on the other side. Whatever we can do to help them release that tension, I think allows them to enter into a space with us that is much more real and valid. And, you know, so I think we were figuring the other day, Liz, that it was about a year and a half or so that I really, the only thing that I started to do with this horse, who I like to lovingly refer to as my red horse, is help him release tension. And he went from pulling the lead rope out of your hands and running away often to, and also with this, if I went out in the field to catch him, I'd have about a 50% chance of actually catching him and bringing him in. And he went from that, you know, resistance, but resistance even, I think that much reluctance to be vulnerable in whatever he was being asked to do, to, you know, if I go out in the field now and he's on his hay bale, oftentimes, not every single time, but oftentimes he will come from the hay bale to meet me. And if he hasn't and I move, sometimes he comes running up after me because he wants to come in and spend time. And most of what we were doing was just letting him release tension. We started with the bladder meridian release technique, which there's lots of free YouTube videos from the Masterson method that shows how to do this. And it started there. And then I really started to notice that sometimes he would put me in different places, you know, maybe 2 or 3 feet from him, and stand in that certain spot and release tension. You know, he would lick and chew, he would yawn, and he was very precise in how he did that. And so I just started to pay attention to it and let him do that, figuring that he needed something that I hadn't been able to offer him in the conventional wisdom that I was seeking. And from standing there so much, observing what was happening with him, I started to notice how many other little things were happening before you even got to that look and chew, like the ripples in the muscles of their muzzles or their eye blinks. A couple of the horses now, and I think he did sometimes too, they'll get like a little twitch just right under their eye. A lot of things that, you know, I don't think I would have noticed or given much importance to before, because I hadn't been on this journey of just having no pressure of performance at all with my horse and just watching to see what he did. And it has made such a difference. He will now even start to volunteer to do healing sessions, you know, by how he comes up to the fence, how he places his body. It's gotten so that I can tell by the look in his eye what he's volunteering to do. And of course, some of this comes about because I've just taken the time to really know him and see what happens, you know, when he looks a certain way. He used to try to bite your calf a lot if you were standing around. And every once in a while now he'll do that. And I've also recognized that before he takes himself to a new level of vulnerability, sometimes some of these behaviors or actions that he takes get a little bigger. Because I think that's really what all of this comes down to, this healing with horses, is creating a space or a place for the horses to be vulnerable, and then creating one for the humans too. Because when we enter humans into the picture, of course, it can affect how the horse is feeling, well, how they're feeling about things, but the energy that they're picking up. Because the more unaligned that we are as humans, the more tense we are, the more we might have a traumatic reaction internalized our body. We might be out of alignment from that. And the horses can really pick up on that. And the more that we can take ourselves into a place of alignment and a place of calmness, the more I think they can open up and show us their vulnerability. And the beauty that this allows for in the healing session with our horses, you know, a lot of times I can have a plan in mind when I have a client coming and we're going to work with a horse, and I go out and I think, okay, one of my most nurturing horse I've ever met, her name is Annie, and she's usually my go-to in the first time that I have a horse session with somebody. And sometimes I go out and, you know, Annie will either not come up to me or turn and walk somewhere away from me in the field. And usually what happens is another one of the horses that she's turned out with will come up to me. It's just amazing when we pay attention to what they're offering, that they offer things that turn out to be even bigger and better than we could. And so, you know, if I go out and I have, you know, I kind of picture who I'm going to work with, and from that resonance, the horses can opt in or opt out. And I don't anymore decide that I have my, you know, my idea is the best one and try to still get that horse, because especially that Annie, she is so good. She'd just be like, all right, all right. But she much prefers it when I listen to her. And one of the favorite stories that I have about her is I had a new client scheduled, just a meet and greet, because I like to make sure that it's a good fit for that client as well. And sometimes even more importantly, I like to make sure I'm bringing the right people around my horses. So I knew that this client was coming. He was in his early 20s. He had autism, and his mom was driving the van up. And so, oh wait, I got a little bit ahead of myself. So I was going out in the field because I was pretty certain that Annie was going to be the perfect horse for this client. And interestingly enough, it turned out that every session after this one, she was. But I went out to get Annie, and she walked away from me. I was like, okay. So as I'm standing there, one of my other horses at the time, his name was Keystone, he came up and stood right by me. And I had already either ridden him or done something that day. And so in my mind, he was just off the docket, you know, I wasn't bringing him in. And I also didn't quite think as flexibly then either, I would admit. So I just kind of, hi Keystone, petted him, and then I went over and tried to get Annie again. And she walked away. And so then another one of my horses was nearby, and I thought, all right, Harley, I'll go get him. So I tried to get him, and he walked away. And this time, Keystone came up to me and bonked me with his head in the back, kind of like, you know, wake up, I'm here. And so I put the halter on him and brought him in. And as I was going across the driveway heading toward the indoor arena, the new prospective client and his mom came up, and she was driving this van. She stopped it before they pulled up all the way into the parking area. And this young man got out of the van, grabbed the lead rope, and I don't mean he was at all disrespectful in his excitement. You know, he took the lead rope and he just led Keystone into the indoor arena. And Annie would not have done that at that time. Harley would not have done that. They would have drug him over to the grass. They would have called to the other horses. It just wouldn't have happened. And had I stuck to my original brilliant idea, thinking I knew what's best, and, you know, gotten Annie anyway when she was telling me I don't think so, you know, this really cool thing wouldn't have happened. And, you know, this client was able to, he was, I don't know the technical therapeutic term anymore, but I just say a germaphobe. He, you know, he had some OCD and he really hated getting his hands dirty, but he was patting Keystone, and his mom was just way impressed over that. And then, so they came out for sessions, and then he ended up falling in love with Annie, and every other time that he was out there, he got to ride Annie. But that, again, that never would have happened if I didn't listen. So, you know, just really paying attention to what the horses are telling me has let them help me set up sessions that I wouldn't have had the insight to do on my own. And so I'm running a little out of time here, but I want to touch a little bit on how holding space for the horses and really watching to see how things are affecting them is healing for us humans. Because we have to really get ourselves in the moment to be able to watch to see if a horse's muzzle is twitching. And if you're distracted by your grocery list or things that you have to do in your home, you can't observe quite the same way. And the horses, I don't think they react and release the same way as when we're not focused there. So, you know, really being in that present moment, holding out, I like to call it that the sacred place of possibility. We're holding that out for the horses to step into, allowing them to drop the tension, be vulnerable, and we will kind of like keep their energy safe and pay attention to it. And, you know, for any of us that had more traditional training in the horse world, we might have a few voices to combat, because what is our horse doing? They're just tuning us out. They're not complying. They're not doing what we told them to do. And sometimes it can be really hard to shut those voices off and trust that we're doing something that is really beneficial for our horses, really beneficial for us, and in the future too, if not now, really beneficial for our clients. So it teaches us to be in the present moment, to be able to hold a space, to be able to hold compassion for another. And most of the things that people come for in counseling sessions or in self-growth work all end up boiling down to some of those things. Because if I am rooted here in this present moment, I'm not going to have anxiety about what's coming in my future. I'm not going to have regret or remorse, can fall into depression about what happened in the past. And the more that I spend in an emotional state, the easier it is to get there. So by lovingly, how we can refer to watching the paint dry with our horses, by standing there and being completely in the moment and focused on them, it lets us be able to bring our bodies more into alignment with our minds and our spirits, and also be able be able to pay attention to what's going on with us and going on within them. And then when you add a human client into this mix, you know, it is very important to hold that space for both. Because if you're working with someone that might have a little trepidation about being around the horse, you'll start to notice the little things that happen on their faces too. the little stiffness that they might hold in their lower back as they're walking up to the horse. It really keens, I think, our observation skills as a practitioner and as a horse trainer. So this is kind of an overview about how the healing interactions with horses can be good for both. And I will see if I can figure out, I had a button before on how to unmute all of you, but if you have a question or a comment or this resonates with you, I would love to hear that.
Yeah, I think I have a question, and it's a little bit, I don't know, some people would probably think it's a little woo-woo, right? But when you're going out to, get a horse to bring in, do you feel like you're kind of holding a picture in your mind of what your intentions are in terms of possibly like picturing the client that you're going to be working with, or kind of what your general plan is for the day when you're going out there in terms of like what you're picturing and that the horses are picking up on that? Or do you think that they're just kind of reading you in a different way and deciding from there?
I do think that it has something to do with the intention that I'm holding, because I didn't, even though I listened to Annie that day with the story that I shared, I hadn't seen this happen that much. So I didn't do it on purpose, but I, in my background, I was a school teacher. And so lesson plans were in my vocabulary. And I also really like to have a plan with a client, because otherwise I feel like I'm not doing my job. And so the plans have definitely gotten a lot more abstract over the years, because again, I leave that space for the horse's input and interaction. But I still, kind of before I go out to get the horse, I'm thinking of the person, and if I've seen them, what they've done before, a little bit my impressions of what could possibly help them. So I set that intention, and I don't always like hold on to it and, I have to focus on this the whole way that I'm out there to get them. I just kind of set that and then go get them as I normally would. So might be woo-woo, but it works.
Yeah, I think so. Well, and I've just observed too that sometimes I wonder whether they like have their own like day planner and like know the times, because I've had ponies that really seem to enjoy working with specific clients, and they will be like waiting at the gate at that time, like they know that client is coming at that time, and I'm like, I don't think that that's really true, but they're picking up on other things, so.
Well, I'm not so sure it isn't all the way true. I mean, we can never really know what they know, but that's why I think when we really just open up and like you just noticing, okay, how does that horse always know that they're there or they're coming? Granted, a lot easier observation is they know when Liz drives up because she feeds them. They don't act the same when I drive up. Some of them will kind of be interested, but not really. And so you can say, oh, well, they knew that her car, when it pulls up the driveway, they know it's her. Well, I can tell you, because sometimes when I get to the farm first, and they might start migrating before she could have even possibly gotten to the driveway. And now it doesn't happen every time. In the spring when the grass is green, sometimes they're just like, well, we don't need to eat anyway. But I really like to adopt that there are no coincidences when we work around the horses. And, of course people can argue with it, but I think even if we don't have to share what we're thinking or feeling inside with everybody else, but when we really pay attention to those or coincidences that seem to happen all the time, the more that we're open to them, I think the more we see that there's something even bigger than we can pinpoint working there. Sounds like you're really in tune with your horses.
I think so, but it's an ongoing practice for sure. Just when I start to feel like I'm getting pretty good at it, then they teach me more. So.
Well, that's one of the things that I've learned to really value about the horses. When I was, late teens, early 20s, and I knew everything, I couldn't appreciate it as much. But as soon as I think I have something figured out or, pretty concrete about, I meet a horse and it's like, there's more to it. That's my red horse. He taught me so much more. And I still love to ride. I will not even begin to admit that I don't love that. But I can get such a feeling of connection now from being around the horses and from, just standing someplace and just thinking about inviting them to come to me. And they do. I don't think I'll ever get tired of a horse coming off the hay to say hi to me. It just, when I was really little, I fell in love with horses. And then I learned how much fun riding was. So for me, just that connection and them wanting to be around me, that's just amazing. Any other questions, comments?
I have a red horse anecdote to add to that.
Oh, good.
Well, I've been noticing ever since there's been snow on the ground, every time the gate wiggles, he comes off the hay to look to see who's over there. What are they doing? And then it's usually me, and he's like, oh, and he'll go back to eating. Sometimes he'll take about 5 steps, and then he realizes, and then he goes back to wherever Missy is. But.
Yeah, I had, I will admit that I misread him a little bit on Sunday. I had a client, and how Amy and Kelsey, how our pastures are set up. My red horse is next to another pasture where there's 3 mares that I like to call the 3 wise women. That's where they live. And I had a client, and I had thought that we were going to ask Missy to help us with her session, one of the wise women. And so we went out, and Missy had kind of turned away a little bit, and red horse came right up to the fence. And he just kept staring, no matter, we kind of walked around a little bit. And so I thought, all right, well, let's, we went through the gate and interacted with him a little bit. And, well, maybe I didn't quite misread. I think he was signing up for a little part, not the whole session. But one of the things that I will get a little better at figuring out is if he just wants to say hi to me, or if he's really volunteering for the session, because I think there is that difference. And that's another thing as a practitioner or trainer. If we make it be okay, that there's still always going to be so much for us to learn. Because a few years ago, I wouldn't have even thought that he would be volunteering for sessions, much less that he would be able to act politely around another person. So it's just kind of a balancing act, but I'm glad you shared that little bit. He's really trying hard. So, Amy, any comments? I don't know if she's still there. Oh, there she is.
Oh, yeah, it just takes me a minute. I'm just going to go back to kind of what Kelsey said, that I think that's woo-woo or whatever, but I know there's been plenty of times being out at the barn and, with the draft horses, sometimes, they're huge, and sometimes you have to get one out of the way to get through to another one. And there's a pair out there that I'll look at him and I'll just say, okay, Rufus, move Max out of the way so he can come out. If he doesn't like whip his head around and just like smash him out of the way so he can get up to the gate. He does it every time I ask. So I don't know if it's just a learned thing or if he understands what I'm saying, but I think there's a lot of times that if you just ask them something, they'll just do it without. So it's almost kind of like they can understand what we're saying. I think there's more to it than what we realize.
Yeah, I think so. And I just kind of put something together. I don't remember if I was listening to something that an animal communicator was talking about, because that's not, a gift that I have. But this communicator was talking about how animals think in pictures. And what I finally got was, so, whatever we are thinking in our minds, we're putting in a picture usually. I know actually I'm very visual, and I think I do think in pictures a lot. And so Rufus, did you say was his name?
Yeah.
Rufus, that's so cute. You are talking to him. It's just, some of us that don't really feel like we've got that gift, or we can't necessarily do it on command all the time. I think that's there. And it also made me think of, such a fine line between when we're observing what is in our horses, but we're asking for something else. For example, if I'm sitting on my horse at the halt and I want it to walk, if I keep picturing what is in my mind, I'm decreasing the likelihood that he's going to walk forward. And if I've got a horse that I'm really in tune with, it doesn't matter what my legs are doing necessarily if I'm still communicating stop to that horse. So it's, just kind of an interesting thing to play with. What are we visualizing? What is our intention, and what's actually in the present moment? And that takes a little bit of practice and opening ourselves up too, which is another one of those things that we can help human clients by asking them to really observe horses and invite them to go on some type of a journey rather than demand that they comply. So yeah, Amy, you are talking to him.
Well, I talk to him all the time. People probably think I'm nuts, but.
Well, it's part of being in the outlier club, right?
I guess, yeah. I like that club, though.
Well, I'm glad. It seems to be I end up in that club all the time.
I'm working on bringing Brianna into that club, too. She's getting that. She's got the basic idea of that. That's the way she wants to interact with her horse. I think she's just not, she's still getting a lot of influence from traditional sources. But I don't think it resonates with her very much, so.
What a great mentor she has in you.
Well, we'll see. I put my little 2 cents in. I try to be very quiet about it, though.
Well, I of course you do, because first of all, it's your way, and second of all, I think there's not always a set of steps, because, all right, so I'm going to recognize that my horse has some tension about this, but in order to release the tension, do I just stand here and kind of hold that space and wait for it? Or maybe my horse has to take a couple steps and bring its body into some type of alignment before it can release that tension. So if we start demanding that people have to follow this routine or this procedure, we're going to lose the exact magic that we're trying to open up the space for. So I really don't know how you can do it other than quietly.
Okay.
Yeah, if you figure out, let me know.
Well, I think you're way beyond my scope at this point.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think, that the horse is helping us hone in on what resonates with our hearts and our intuition guiding us to helping them offer that information. I want to think of a new term for vicious circle because that's what it is, but I don't like that term.
What do you mean?
Well, because the more that we follow our intuition, the more that we invite information in from the horses. And the more that we invite information in from the horses, the more that our intuition will tell us where to go next.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's not the vicious circle for sure.
No, but I don't know another term that means that.
Huh. We'll have to figure one out.
Okay. That was, yeah. All right, so Zoom's about ready to cut me out. Any other questions, comments before I end the recording?
No. Liz is shaking her head.
I'm good. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Kim.
Oh, absolutely. It was nice to meet you by Zoom. And
Yeah, nice to meet you as well.
thanks, Amy, for coming. And thank you, Magic Carpet, for letting me know how to work the controls. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, ladies. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, Kim.
Bye.
Bye.